All right, joining me now is Eric. Eric, you are an author. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I say author, you're specifically a novelist, and this is your first time as a novelist. The book that we're here to talk about right there, and I'll also include some pictures on the video portion, but also a filmmaker as well.
Yeah, kind of doing the double duty there and a screenwriter. Whatever I got to do to make a living.
Well, I'm going to jump around a bit with all of that. So,
Sure.
what have you worked on film wise, screenwriting and filmmaking? What have you done so far?
Yeah, I did a couple of indie projects. Mostly not heard of unless you're kind of in the kind of cult underground community. Did a feature film called Toast for the Gods back in the early 90s, set it in Seattle just as grunge was taking over. And put that movie with all kinds of, freaks and artists and musicians and drug dealers and told this incredible readaptation of Homer's The Odyssey set in the underbelly of Seattle in the early 90s. And it was rock and roll to say the least. It was a bit punk rock, but the fact that we just went out there and stole everything we could and didn't take no for an answer, and went ahead, blazed on, and tried to get this incredible film done. Won a bunch of underground awards, the kind of film that plays at midnight at the festivals. A lot of fun, great spirit, great cast of characters, fed them on cigarettes and pizza and booze. And kind of did it in punk rock style. And that feature film, won a bunch of awards. You can actually see it on YouTube. If you go to my website at ericmagan.com, that's my first and last name.com. I got a link right to the YouTube. You can check out the trailer. You can check out the whole film. A lot of fun. Again, we did it for no money. Had a blast doing it. We did it at a time period that was right for independent filmmaking. It was right for Seattle. We just wanted to capture that whole kind of early 90s time capsule, in one gigantic small movie.
I think that's amazing, and I think when it comes to movies, TV shows, whatever, you can be in a mood for a thing, right? Sometimes you're in the mood for your millions upon millions of dollar blockbuster, whatever, and all your special effects, and you can go check it out and be like, "Oh, that's really cool." But then also, movies and TV shows tell a story. You don't need all those things. You just need a good story and a good storyteller, as putting it together goes. And I
Yeah.
think that's amazing. And to be honest, when you're saying that, I'm thinking, you know what? There's several stories out there, including that one, that you learn in school. And it's so hard to relate to things from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago that we're learning about, right? And you're making it in a way that you're learning those concepts, but in something that is relatable to people that could be listening and watching it.
That's correct, and it's really interesting because that's exactly what we wanted to do. When I went to film school, got into De Niro's Tribeca Film School early on, so it was one of the first classes. We're very very lucky to get in there. I don't know how I got accepted, but I did. And I met a film partner from Italy, and literally we couldn't even speak the same language, you know. And the only thing we had in common is we both read Homer's The Odyssey when we were a kid. Like, here you are halfway across the world, two kids growing up, two punks, one in Italy, one in New York, and the only thing they had in common is Homer's The Odyssey, like the greatest story ever told. And we said to ourselves, well, that's what we have in common. Let's adaptate this. Let's go to Seattle instead of Odysseus being this great hero. Let's make him a drug dealer. Let's make his wife Penelope be a stripper. And let's make sure that she gets accosted by some evil Johns that won't let her go. And he's got to try to get home after one big drug deal to save her. And he can't get home, right? Because all the gods and goddesses are in the way. But all these gods and goddesses are strippers and hookers and drug dealers and musicians and all the indie, grunge musicians and colorful artists that were just all littered all over Seattle. It was like, it was an incredible thing to sort of take something that long ago, an amazing story, and kind of readaptate it today so that people could be like, oh yeah, I can see that. You know what? This guy's a drug dealer, but he's also a hero. Like there's some
Right.
qualities in him that I love. And these people, man, they're not your typical gods and goddesses, but look hard. You'll see something worthy there. Something exceptional.
That's awesome. And I think it's really cool concept to do the adaptation. But then if you think about it, like that story, when it's being written, it's kind of like a global thing, like gods, like that is the most zoomed out version of everything, right? And then in any scene out there, any city, any whatever, if you zoom in, you can relate those things to the characters within. It doesn't have to be a national this, a worldwide that, a whatever, right? It can zoom right in and just be relatable as it sounds like you made it.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And, just, it's like, we're all but gods and goddesses, and in my book we're all sinners. It's like we got to celebrate, who we are. We're not perfect, but there's so many redeeming qualities and so many that people can relate to. I'm just, I kind of, yeah, I'm the kind of person that, it's hard to watch a Hollywood movie that has, the happy ending, and they got the main character and he's conflicted and then he's changed at the end and he's a better person, and I'm just like, oh, come on, man. Like, that is so not real, man. I want to give people, like, the real deal here. I'm not holding any punches.
Right. And there's many versions of that story for everybody, right? Some people
Yeah.
want to see the happy ending because that's probably what they wish for themselves, or maybe it's relatable. But then also, as you said, on the flip side of that, there's plenty of people that don't get to experience that. So instead of just wishful thinking, it kind of goes along to, oh, that's relatable to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like it. There needs to be proportion in storytelling because there's a lot of different outcomes out there.
It's a lot of different outcomes, and there's so many people reading that have different opinions, and I want to make sure that I encapsulate time periods, in that movie with Seattle in the early 90s. In my book, Thank God for the Sinners, it's really takes place overseas in China, in sort of the early 2000s. I've worked overseas in China for, 15, 20 years, and then I lived there for about 10 years. And I did it in the very beginning, when China was kind of the wild, wild west when you went over there. It wasn't the big superpower it was now. It was kind of this, third world country, with a lot of ambition and a ton of corruption, that just wanted to get things done. And they didn't do things always the nicest way or the easiest way, but it was a really special time period because there weren't a lot of Americans over there. I was young and I was dumb, and I was like, you know what, I want to go make this thing happen. And went out there and opened up a bunch of factories and went to a lot of different cities, and sometimes cities where they've never even seen Americans before, and just wanted to take this little time capsule of craziness in this giant country and say, now I'm going to spotlight this and show the world what happened in the early 2000s in China, just like I wanted to spotlight Seattle in the early 90s. Just these incredible moments that will never happen again.
So with both the movie and with your new book, did you live in Seattle? Obviously, you've lived in China where the book's based. Are these they're fictional stories, obviously,
There,
or at
there,
least based on the ones
yeah,
based on a previous book, which is fiction, I'm going to call it, but a great
yeah.
story nonetheless. But do you derive life experience, things that you experienced that kind of inspired in either or both of the stories?
Yeah, I think most, if not all, writers do. I mean, we have to draw upon something, right? Because it's real important to make sure that when your audience and your readers are reading it, that you fully have got them absorbed. It can't be phony. It has to be like, oh my God, I never knew this existed, and wow, yeah, I could smell those smells. I could taste that disgustingness. I got it, man. That cigarette breath is in my face, and you got to kind of put it out there to make it real believable. So yeah, you draw upon everything that happens, in your life, and fictionalize it to make it a little bit more dramatic, for the read. You take things that maybe you haven't heard, you haven't seen really, but you've heard, and you kind of combine a lot of different instances together and kind of create this remarkable story, that people can follow along with and maybe learn something from, maybe be repulsed, maybe be happy, but you really want to kind of put them in a situation that feels real. So you got to draw on real experiences.
And that makes sense. I would say that, in most stories, people are either going to be relating to because they've experienced something similar, or they have seen, the Hollywood dramatizations or read stories in the news or something that kind of goes along. So that's kind of where interest is coming from. And I
Yep.
would say that, as you pointed out, you want to include like some experiences. You want it to feel real. You want to feel like the story's telling. If you're the telling the story to the person who has no idea but is interested, they're not going to know the difference. But for that other part of the audience where they've lived those things and they're like, you don't want people focusing on, well, that's not right. That I've experienced those type of things. That's not how it goes. And I found myself watching a TV show just the other day, and I got stuck on something, and I'm kind of missing because I'm like, that's not how it goes. Wait, you missed this whole thing, And then I'm focused on this, and my mind's away from the story before I realize it's just a show. They tell the story whatever they want. Most of the people out there probably haven't experienced these things, and so they probably have no idea. But I'm sure from a writer's perspective, you want to be as accurate on specific
Yeah.
details as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, your background, this being your first novel, your background is as a screenwriter as well. So, did you write this with any intention of maybe turning this into something?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people that read the book, they do say that the book itself is very cinematic, in how I write, and I think that's because I've written screenplays and I've directed movies before. So, yeah, I've always wrote it for the intention that how would it be on the big screen as well, and I've always known, like I'm doing right now, which is adapting the book into a screenplay. I got agents and people like, I got to get the screenplay out there. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of knew that was going to happen. So yeah, I think, for me, I'm kind of real ambitious, and so I write the book and I'm thinking about the screenplay and how it would look on the theater at the same time. The book itself, it's got a lot of different elements to it. There's the fact that, every chapter is an ode to a punk rock classic song that I grew up with, in the 70s and the 80s. And so, kind of fitting the music to the chapter, and then kind of creating a Spotify playlist with it so that people are reading the story, they're listening to the story, they got music involved with it. They kind of got the whole three-dimensional vibe going on. So yeah, I kind of, went for like that trifecta, let's read about it, let's vision it on the screen, and then let's hear what the music is behind it.
And I love that part of it. Obviously, we're punk podcast here. I typically focus on anything punk related, whether it's movies, a TV show, mostly music, obviously, but books and anything that kind of falls under that umbrella, art, if for that matter. I don't care what it is, but anything, because there's so many things that can spawn from it. But I find it especially interesting what you did there. And so, uh, something I would love to see, and if that were to be made into a movie, uh, I've only heard, right? I have no experience personally, but writers get to write, put out, and then depending on who gets, you're like, all right, I'm selling it to whoever, and then whatever director gets put in and write, they could have a totally different vision than you. So I'm going to go down the lines of what if you get somebody that loves your story, but then it becomes, well, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. Maybe they're not so into punk. Maybe they want a little bit different theme. And to be honest, I think that the way you've done the book, punk's probably an essential theme, and I would hope that anybody that would want to be involved with it would probably keep that aesthetic. But all in all, I think the punk aesthetic generally is kind of on the fringes. It's not real common in mainstream anything for that matter. It's kind of outskirts. Like I point out, oh shoot, they're playing a song. I went and watched a Keanu Reeves movie, the Good Fortune, the other day, and they had a Buzzcock song in there. I was like,
There you go.
hey, that's awesome. But
I
it's
mean,
it's fringe. You kind of point out and recognize the show. Only Murders in the Building. They ended with the Clash song. Somebody got murdered at the very end.
that's right.
Spoiler alert. And so you notice those things as a punk because it's so uncommon for it to pop up.
It's uncommon, but you're seeing so much of it today. I think a lot of us, boomers have grown up, we're aging out. But yet, that we're still an attractive audience, right? We're kind of like that 50 to, 45 to 65-year-old, we're the ones that, can go out there and, and say, okay, wow, that's cool. They're doing a Ramon song. on an ED medication or something like that. We're like, yeah, hey ho, let's go. I got it. You know, it's
Right.
perfect for me. It's ED medication and it's the Ramones. It's just my age group, you know. So it's like I think they're trying to find ways to, you know, pitch products to people our age. And so, you know, punk is just one of those things that it never really goes away. It just keeps readaptating itself, right, and turning itself and reinventing itself. And so it's always going to be there. But you know, as far as like selling the screenplay and you know having you know people say, oh no, you know, I really think that the punk isn't right. We need to tone it down. It's probably not the right script for them and
Right.
we are kind of pitching it to studios and directors that are kind of you know on the fringe, you know, the ones that
Good.
get it, you know,
Right.
the ones I'm not, you know, that's look, it's a tough story and it's written, you know, it's written with a lot of bravado and it's pretty frenetic and it holds no punches. It's dark, it's gritty. It's not for everybody. But for the people that are like-minded, you know, and are into the music and can understand, you know, sort of the themes behind it, you know, the trauma, the abuse, the violence, you know, everything that kind of goes into, you know, our kind of maelstrom of, you know, of ideals as we grow up, is going to really appreciate it. And I think, and I hope that, you know, if this ever gets into a movie that there'll be a little bit of creative control there where we can get the right. I mean, look, I want Iggy Pop in the movie, you know, I want Henry in the movie, you know, Henry Rollins in the movie. Like, you know, it's
Right.
like, you know, there's great cameos in this book for incredible, you know, of these artists to kind of pop in. And so I hope that that spirit will be portrayed if this book ever gets sold, which you know would be an amazing thing on its own. But even without that, it's been an amazing adventure to write. You know, we won four book festival awards already in the past like 2 months, all for psychological thrillers and horror, and it's been mind blowing. You know, I didn't expect that.
That's awesome. And congratulations, by the way. That's quite an accomplishment.
It is. I mean, I never wrote this book setting out thinking like, okay, hey, I'm going to win some festivals now. I was just like, I got burning desire to put something on paper that's going to make people cringe. Let's do it.
I would imagine that's probably you get that from the readings as opposed to somebody that does set out like, oh, I just need to write something that's going to be well awarded, you know, and I think people will read through that as opposed to, I just want to write a good story. I've got this
Yeah,
story, I want to tell it, and you just write it for the sake of it being a good story. And I think that it can show, and that's pretty great that you've got that many awards already. When was the release date? So how long has the book been available for people to get?
I mean, the book's been available, I think, since June, something like that. So just over the summer. So just recently, just a few months. But yeah, I mean, look, the book is, it's been reviewed really nicely. It's been accepted so far from a lot of people. Again, it's not for everybody, so you do get that, you know, occasional person. It's like, oh, that's not necessarily for me, but that's fine. I didn't write it for everybody, you know.
That's how a lot of movies are. I'll use the word scary to kind of sum up the psychological, the thriller, the horror, all of those things. And some people just aren't into scary, you know. Other people are
Yeah,
really into it, and you know, you're just going. And that goes with any genre. You know, you could
yeah,
get romance, rom com. You pick your thing, and people will like it, or people are gonna be like, nah, I don't want to waste my time. So, I don't think you can please everybody with that. What you want
no,
to please is the people that are into that. The people that are into what you've done are into your thing, then you did it right.
yeah,
And then I guess
totally
if you can pull other people in, you did even better.
right.
I read a little bit about your writing process when you set down to write. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that when you're kind of getting in the mood for what you're doing? And I don't know if that just applied to this book or maybe your other screenwriting in general, but why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because you know I do not write in silence. And I say this many times. I mean, silence is just not my friend. I never liked it, never comfortable with it. You know, music, you know, has been a huge influence on my entire life. You know, just about everything I've done, you know, has been sort of like, you know, engaged in my mind of, what kind of music would spur that on, you know. And so I write, you know, full blast, you know, I'm sitting down and I got the butthole surfers jammed up to 11, you know, and you know, my writing room, this room here is kind of set up like a crime scene. You know, I got like post-its everywhere, you know, we got strings going from this post-it to that post-it, the music's on. I'm attacking my keyboard like it's never been attacked before, and I'm just letting it all go out. It's kind of like I don't know. I kind of analogize it to like when you watch like professional sports, and you're watching like a football game, and all the guys before the game they got their beats on, their earphones on, and they're all getting into it, man. They're getting psyched, they're getting pumped, and that's exactly what I do before I write. I got to get pumped up, I got to get psyched, I got to get those songs to start lifting my emotions and kind of put me into the realm of okay, this is creative, man. This is nonstop. This is going for it. Let's go for it.
I know you talked about Butthole Surfers, you mentioned them specifically, and
Yeah.
then I read that you throw on some hardcore music after that.
Yeah.
Does the music, do you intentionally change music styles or maybe beats per minute even? I'll get even real specific, beats per
Mm.
minute to depending on what you think you're trying to write, or maybe just as a, all right, I need to change it up.
Yeah. I mean, there's always that chapter that we're going into, or that scene that I know I'm going to start writing. And so that's why, again, I tried to put the right musical, punk anthem to the right chapter, because that was really the song that was kind of going through my brain when I wrote that chapter. And it's got a lot to do with a little bit to do anyway with the chapter in itself, the decisions that the character makes, the kind of, confliction in his brain, and I'm like, well, that this song perfectly, says that.
Right.
So let's put that behind it too. But yeah, no, I mean, I'll switch from the surfers, and then I'll get into all my New York hardcore bands. And a big shout out to Murphy's Law and Agnostic Front. Saw them about 2 nights ago here in LA, and it was like seeing old friends again. But super super inspiring.
That's awesome. Great bands. Uh, what on all your chapters, do you have bands picked out in mind, or maybe did just hearing something like going through your music and then maybe something like, the light bulb goes off? Do you have music inspiring the chapters or bands already in mind? And so maybe you listen to their music to then inspire what goes on in the chapter.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, it's the chapter and the writing is always first. I've always got the scenes down and kind of formulating how I want that to be. Um, but I think after the chapter is written, and then kind of while I'm writing it, I'm listening to a ton of music as it goes along, and then there'll be something that really gets to me, and I'll go, okay, cool, like that kind of fits. But the writing is definitely first. The story's first. The writing's first. The music is just helps emphasize everything that's going on within my brain and within the writing process.
I've read and heard people talk about like the creative process, like we're a conduit, right? Like it's coming from somewhere, and sometimes you just have to be in the right mindset and then it'll start to flow. And maybe that's for you specifically. You get like the right set of tunes on, and then that conduit's open, and then the stories just kind of flows out. Maybe you get that feeling.
Yeah, and and this book in particular, because the main character, he isn't, he is a punk rocker. He did grow up in the early, 80s in New York, like myself. A lot of commonality there. And punk played a huge part in his life, and and in his decision making process. And so I, kind of said to myself, well, now I have this character. He's not a punk, in the main world here of this character. He's an adult. He's a business executive living overseas in China. He's also a covert double agent for the U.S. and China. He's riddled with mental instability. He's a bit of a sociopath. But underneath it all, he's a punk rocker. And it's kind of like, let's just say that like you were like in your teens, watching at CBGBs, and then you kind of grew up and got into the real world, and then you got into further into the real world where you became part of like a government espionage program, and then you were head out overseas, and you have a massage girl that tragically dies in your hotel room, and you're gotta like protect your cover, protect your person, protect your business, protect your family, and yet you're in like a communist country, in the middle, on the other end of the world, and you have this punk rock sensibility about yourself, and this
Right.
sort of mental instability. And you're prone to violence, and you're prone to like, how do you make that all work?
Right.
And that's what it's all about.
Did the commonalities end at the espionage? You probably can't say, right? You can't say. I don't want to blow your cover.
No, no, no. It's no, again, we take dramatic liberties to make the character more interesting. And it was like that for me too. I mean, here I am living in China for about 15 years, and I had friends and family like, what the hell are you doing, And how do I explain? Like, I'm also creating products. I'm a product developer. I go in and I find factories, I make product, we make them, exceptional products at great prices, and then we sell them. So, it's part of the gig, but you gotta go out there and do that. But it's hard for people to understand because it's not necessarily a job that you go to college to train to do. It's a life experience job. Um, and so yeah, there was many times where people were like, well, what the hell are you doing over there? You're a spy. You must be in the government. Like, you're like what the hell are you? And I'm like, come on, man. But would be really interesting if that was to happen.
Right?
And I'm
And you
not talking.
probably couldn't say if it did.
I couldn't see what we did, but I was like, but not like a John Wick type of guy, the opposite.
Right?
Yeah,
Well, maybe ideas like that inspired parts of the character then.
certainly did.
When writing this book, did you get ideas? I get ideas doing all the various things that I do, and sometimes I'm like, that really doesn't fit here. Pin in that, it'll be its own thing. When writing this book, did you get ideas that maybe either didn't fit or just inspirations for what comes next? This was your first novel?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Thank you for asking that because that did happen quite a lot. I'm working on my second novel now, the second Rick Price novel, which is Thank God for the Drugs. It's always thank God for something. Thank God for the sinners, thank God for the drugs. This time I'm taking Rick Price out of, his craziness in China and putting him back in the United States and having him on a cross-country trip in the United States. So we're going to keep bringing him to different lands. We're going to keep bringing him to different stuff. And yeah, there's some things that I wrote for Thank God for the Sinners, and I said, let's show that for Thank God for the Drugs. Let's show that for, I'm not quite sure, but it's not, I could use that somewhere else. And so yeah, there's been a bunch of that happening too, which kind of is really interesting. I mean, as a matter of fact, when I finished this first book, I put the first chapter to the second book at the end of this one to kind of give you a little bit of cliffhanger because that's how much I'm going into what's the next evolution of this character.
That's fantastic. So I guess along those lines, do you have a picture? I mean, obviously the story's different, but it's almost like a punk rock Jason Bourne. I know Jason Bourne, he
Yeah,
forgot who he was. And, there's not that much similarity, but in the sense
yeah.
that it's a spy, had a series and so forth. So is that you have a second? Do you have kind of a mapped out, for lack of a better pick, but like Harry Potter, right? She had 7 books or 7 stories, kind of all mapped out to tell the entirety of that type of story, not the entirety of that world, as it were, but the entirety of that story. So, do you have something like that mapped out?
Loosely, but yeah, I kind of know where it's going to end. I just don't know when it's going to end, but I know how it's going to end. And yeah, and again, I wanted to take this very dysfunctional kind of anti-hero that we can all sort of relate to some degree, who just you get to understand why he's in the messes that he's in, why he makes the decisions that he does, how he loses his mind all the time and say, okay, well, let's just put him in different scenarios. Let's have
Right.
him in Asia here. Let's put him in the United States over here. Then maybe he'll be in the UK for the next following one, and kind of explore what that means. And then also show the audience and the readers like, a world, that they might be familiar with and they may not be familiar with, but they will be familiar with the character. And then kind of say like, okay, well, how does that, how does he react to each of these situations? So there is a loose bit of, yeah, I know where the book is going. I certainly know how I want it to end at the very end. I just don't know when I'm gonna get there.
Well, I got several questions here, so hopefully I remember them all. First, I guess going into book 2, and then if where it may evolve there, are the chapters also going to be a punk theme, to it, or are you going to evolve into something different? Where are you going? Are you keeping that going?
I'm going to try to keep that going without having it feel forced. Like that's the issue, right? Because you're
Right.
kind of like, I have what, almost 50 chapters here. That's 50 songs, right? I'm going to do another book, another 50 chapters, another 50 songs. It's like what I don't want it to do is feel forced. So what I have envisioned is like this is a lot of music that I grew up with when I was younger, in the 70s and 80s, kind of that teenage or before teenage, upper teenage years, and then I kind of want to get, maybe I'll delve into the next one into the 90s, and then kind of so as punk evolves, I'll have the different bands that have evolved with it, and kind of as it kind of grew up. So maybe at some point, if if I can make that happen, you can read the series and listen to it and kind of get like a whole history of punk rock in itself.
Well, at least you pick songs, not bands. Then it probably would have been really forced. But
Yeah,
there's several bands you can go back to that band probably several times, and but use
yeah,
a different track name. So at least you went that route. That's
yeah,
probably helpful. And then just as you pointed out, you can go back into the '90s. There's probably a lot of story to tell,
yeah.
no matter which way you go with it.
This book, I also, besides the punk rock music and being a punk, blah blah blah, I also dedicated this book in the very beginning, first page to basically to a skinhead who basically punched me in the face during my first Dead Kennedy show, and knocked me out on the floor. And quite honestly, man, it was since that time, and I say it in my book here and in my dedication that all I wanted to do was find that kid again, and I just wanted to thank him, you know, thank him for like showing me what a punk was all about, showing me what life was all about, and it's not like, he hit me and I got knocked down and then trampled on, I got picked up back up again. You know how the mosh pit works,
Yep.
there's a bit of, violence, and then there's a bit of camaraderie there, and so it was just, and I was young, and it was Dead Kennedys, and it was at Irving Plaza in New York City, and it changed my life. It just did, and I just feel like that there's these little instances in time, that you'll never forget, but yet they come out and they radically change you. I've never been in a mosh pit before that Dead Kennedy show. I think I was 14 or something like that, and it was scared to death, and then got in there, and then got clocked, and then got picked up again, and then just stayed there. It's like
Right.
I found a home.
I would agree, and I would say that you could have the exact same experience in New York City, but out on the street, no music playing, walking to somewhere else, and somebody comes and knocks you down in the same instance, but nobody there to pick you up, and then that could be something that changes your life too, but not in
Yeah,
the same way, right? In this instance, you had that same type of violent experience, but then you're in this kind of a family, as it were.
yeah.
And you're like, yeah, a lot of angry people kind of flock to that thing, that mosh pit. That's kind of why it evolved. But at the same time, most people that participate in that aren't there to just stomp everybody down and stomp them
No.
while they're down. They understand, hey, oh, my bad. Pick him up, get a little aggressive. We get a little violent,
Yeah.
whatever, but we're all there together and we want to make sure that we all leave together.
And that's what I think, most people are attracted to punk, and that kind of music is about. It's that whole, experience. It's the family aspect of it. We're a bunch of kids, dysfunctional, terrible family lives, creative, angry, confused. You're kind of all in the same boat, and it's really interesting, right? Because you kind of go like, well, yeah, I'm a punk rocker. I'm the most individual person in the world. It's just me versus the world, and then you get to like a show, and you're like, there's everybody's just like me. This is great. You're kind of rallying against like, I don't want to be like everybody else. And then you go to like a great show, and you're like, oh, thank God I'm with everybody that's like me,
Yeah, I can see that, right? We have that attitude. You have to,
right?
if you feel alone, you have to kind of develop that. Well, screw everybody else. I'm going to do this. But then people are pack people, right? People we just are. Very few people are actually really loner people. And so
Yeah.
once you do find your pack, you embrace your pack.
Yeah, 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 and that's the community of punk. That's the
Right.
music, that's the community, that's the do it yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Kind of get your voice heard no matter what. You don't have to be the best musician, you don't got to be the best singer, you don't got to be the best anything. You just have to have a voice.
Right.
And then here's like a platform for you to say what you want to say. And that's, I mean, that to me, that's the most American thing that there is.
Right? It would be amazing if you got some, there's not that many real famous punks. I mean, obviously you mentioned Iggy Pop,
Yeah. Henry
uh,
Rollins.
Henry Rollins.
No,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But you would probably pick somebody to play Rick Price. You'd probably pick somebody younger, right?
Yeah.
Younger
Oh,
than those
totally.
guys. No offense to
Yeah. Yeah.
them, but they might
Yeah.
not portray the character as the character was intended, especially for longevity of the character. But it'd be really cool to have somebody that kind of fits that, not just punk aesthetic, but like that punk life, but then can also put that out, as the carry the film.
Yeah, it's it would be I think a really important decision, and one where we can hopefully if that ever happens find an actor that can portray this side of it without feeling phony, right? Because that's what we all hate about movies. When you see something, you're like, oh no, not again. This guy can't play that role. I know exactly who that is. Like that's
Right.
crazy, and so you got to kind of right. We'd have to find somebody that can fit that role and be believable at the same time.
Right. And then you having different sceneries or locations, as it
Yeah.
were. It would be really cool to include, people in bands from those areas, whether they're known or not, but just as the auxiliary characters. They don't have to be like the main characters, because I'm sure
No
that
way.
but you include some other people, and China's got a lot of cool punk bands out there too. And so it'd be really cool, just in that, most people would have no idea whatsoever that they were probably in a punk
Yeah,
band, but just that, and then each other location that you went to, whatever city, and you just throw a couple people in, and it, almost an Easter egg, as it were.
that's exactly right. Be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I did. I think I had two things that I forgot, but one is I was going to say you don't want to turn into George R. R. Martin, right? And
No.
you want to keep pace with once the first one is starting to be made a movie, you got to be able to keep pace. That way they don't take over your story because you can't keep up, and then your story turns into something that you don't want it to be.
Hey, brother, man, if that ever happens, it'll be a different conversation.
Right? I'm sure maybe more focused. You'd be like, all right, I've got the ideas. I just need to get them out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I hope that day comes.
Yeah, I do too. I would love to see more stories. And to be honest, in when it comes to film anyway, like there's still plenty of people that like books, but a lot of the really good
Yeah.
books obviously get made into some either a film or a TV series or something, because more people will come across the story and enjoy the story in that format. A lot of people with books do audiobooks. So I guess before I
Yeah.
get into that film any further, do you have an audiobook? And if not, are you planning on doing an audiobook?
Well, there is an audiobook. I didn't do it. The publisher that I did it with I think AI, so it sounds a little bit goofy. It's like Siri reading my book, so, come on, man. So I didn't get an opportunity to do it myself, although I would love to do that one day. I hope I do have find the time to do that.
Well, that would be great. Along the lines of the movies and TV shows. Then I think just more people get to come across them, and we live in an era where a lot of stuff is getting remade, which I don't mind. I'm seeing a lot of the things that I grew up on now, and they're getting remade. So you're retelling stories, and on the one hand, I'm like, well, I guess most people that didn't catch them then probably aren't going to go back. There's too many new things. They're not going to go back to something 30 years ago or wherever and consume the old version. So I guess at least the story I enjoyed is going to get retold for better or for worse. But the better at this point in time is having stories like yours where it's an original story, so people don't
Right.
have to say, hey, we're dry on originals, we don't have good originals, let's just keep remaking stuff. Remake on occasion, but let's keep finding good stories like this to retell.
Yeah, I would say that, that's the one thing that, not the one thing, but that's the main thing that the book has going for it. It is completely original. I mean, there's not been a story, I don't
Right.
think, like this ever. There couldn't be, because of the experiences that I went through. I don't think that many people have. But at the same time, I have a lot of similar experiences that I think most people could relate to, and some maybe sometimes don't talk about. And I wanted to put that into a main character that, you understand, why he has these challenges. I literally take this horrendous scene in China that goes on, open up the book because I love movies, I love books that open up to like this calamitous crazy situation. You go like, holy shit, you know, how the hell, what's going on here, you know? And I wanted to like put that right in front, like this amazingly, ridiculously horrible thing going on overseas in China with this character. And then you kind of go like, why, how? And then I kind of jump back into his life. So you go back literally from his childbirth, um, into, childhood, early adulthood, high school, college, and then kind of ramp it all the way up so that you're kind of going back and forth from back in time, modern, real time, back in time, real time, back in time, real time. So that, somewhere down the middle of this book, you go like, oh shit, I get it now. Now I understand how this guy, why he's in this position that he's in, where he is, why he's making these decisions. It's all making sense, and that's the most challenging part about writing a book like this is kind of stepping back and forth, we're not losing the reader and keeping them entertained, but at the same time giving them just a lot of backstory, but not all at once, because I want everybody to kind of go like, wait a minute. I kind of think I know, but oh yeah, now I know.
I think it can be messed up. Not that you did, but in like in any story, you can do it poorly. But I think that's the best way to tell a story. Because if you would have just taken all the backstory and started the story and then went kind of in a linear fashion that way, it probably wouldn't have been as interesting. It would have been
No,
harder to relate, but you're kind of waiting to the right times to then divulge those specific things about the backstory, which when you do it in that fashion, I think it makes it more entertaining and it kind of it's pausing like the main story, I suppose, but it's like pausing it in a good way. Like, oh, now I'm going to understand why we are at this point and probably helpful going forward.
yeah, yeah, and it keeps a lot of suspense because sometimes you just don't know why, and then you kind of find out and go like, oh, cool, got it,
Right.
check, yeah,
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I think that's so cool that you did this book because like anytime anybody does anything that's so overtly punk, right? Again, I was mentioning TV shows and movies that there's really very little punk anywhere about any of those things, but it's really cool to acknowledge the ones that are really putting it out there because I think especially in the eras that you were referring to, the 70s and 80s, it was mainstream music at that point. Yeah, I mean it was
yeah,
kind of underground, but that was as mainstream as punk really got. I mean there was the pop punk era resurgence in the 90s,
yeah,
which is I think is a little bit different. That music scene had kind of emerged. That was punk kind of taking other music out there and kind of blending, as opposed to punk gave birth to a lot of things. Punk came before new wave. New wave came out of punk music, stuff like that. And so in those eras, it was definitely very popular. And I like that you're referencing back there. Uh, are there anything, I guess, on a punk specific question, are there any newer bands or newer music? You were mentioning Agnostic Front, Murphy's Law. Not that they're not new, but they're
no,
they're legends, right? And so that's really where the punk focus has been, which is fantastic because you can't be where we're at now without that. But is there
yeah.
anything just on a punk music related question, I guess, that you listened
That's
to recently?
it's a good question, and and I'm sure like you and the rest of the listeners out there, we're just constantly trying to land on what the next thing is, and try to understand what's happening today in today's music and how it's changing and evolving. And there's a lot of punk bands out there now that are supposedly punk that I don't want to badmouth punk bands, that I kind of go like, well, that's a little bit soft.
Right.
No, that's a little bit too much more, I don't know what's going on here. But look, times change. So what I found myself recently really enjoying lately is kind of a different subset of music. It's like more of this, I'm out in California now, and so we have this and it maybe for the past 10 years or so, uh just a big resurgence of sort of this garage rock stripped down music. You get bands like the OCs, bands like the Meat Bodies and Ty Segall, and a lot of these sort of like just underground garage, loud rockers, a bit psychedelic, and a bit loud, and just unconventional, doing things their own way. But the music isn't something that's that you haven't necessarily heard before. It's taking a lot of riffs back from the early 70s and 80s, and I think that's what really attracts me to it. It's raw, it's loud, It's not looking for commercial success. It's got a, great following of people here on the West Coast and the East Coast, the people that, kind of know it, but it's mature, and I kind of enjoy that sort of genre now.
I love it too. Doing the podcast, I mean, I come across, I don't know, thousands upon thousands of bands.
I'm sure.
I listen to, there's plenty of bands whose discographies are so big, and I love the bands, and I know 15, 20, 30 even of their tracks greatly. And then I
Yeah,
still keep finding myself going back, like, I didn't even know they did that song. I've never heard that song of theirs, and it's been out for 30 years. But I also love that there's so many really cool bands coming out where I hear
there
something, I'm
is.
like, is, is this new? This sounds like this was like 30 years ago, but it's brand new bands, young kids, and they're doing their kind of their
Yeah.
own thing, but it sounds so much like that stuff from the 70s and 80s. Like, yeah, I'm so glad they're doing that. And that's really cool.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And then, then there's all the, bands today that are kind of punk style bands that, they're able to make incredible livings and, have success in careers. The bands like the Idols, Viagra Boys. I mean, this a
Right.
whole new generation, and they're huge,
Right.
massive. It's incredible that, that could happen today. It's just remarkable.
I agree. And, anybody that can do it, great. Lucky for them, because not everybody gets to in the punk scene. And I'm sure that's a lot of, I don't really pay enough attention to a lot of the other styles of music. So I'm sure there's plenty of people that aren't
Yeah.
very successful in those, but it's great for the ones that are.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then, being able to keep, true to who their roots are, and still be able to be a success out of it. It's nice that's able to still happen today.
Right. Absolutely. Another question popped into my head, I guess, going back to where you're going from here. You're pulling from your experience in your novel from China and your time in China. You've in LA, you've been to New York. I guess going back to that Seattle question, did you spend
Yeah.
time in Seattle?
Yeah, I lived in Seattle for about 2 years in the very, very early 90s, right before grunge hit. And then I went to film school, and then grunge kind of blew up and we went back there to make the movie. So yeah, it was and that was again a remarkable time period. So, I have lived around the world a lot, other than China. I've lived all throughout Southeast Asia, and then I've taken a bunch of jobs all over the US. And so, I do a lot of chronicling, as I'm traveling, a lot of taking in inspiration and stories, and, looking at sort of the seedier things in life, the things that are, taking a walk around that's maybe not in the nicest areas, but trying to understand, really where I am, and what this all means, and not do it from the tourist angle.
Right.
And I think that's I mean, look, I think that's why people love to travel, right? I mean, it's an amazing thing to do. And to go and explore and see things that you haven't seen before, kind of open your mind, talk to people you haven't ever talked before, check in, be in Mexico City and jump into some kind of, death metal band that's playing above like some crazy bar somewhere where everybody, it's like, you gotta experience life, and and
Right.
and and traveling has been just such a huge, part of my life as well. And so, yeah, look, like you said before, we write upon experiences, and things that we've done. And so, yeah, this character is going to go places like I went places, and I'll try to bring them to, new places that maybe I haven't been to yet, that I'm going to go try to figure it out.
That was going to be the follow-up question. I was going to say, all right, is he going to locations you've been to, or are you going to have to go on location and get some
Yeah.
inspiration?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go on location.
That's fair.
As I told my family, see you.
Right? A good
I
reason to
got
go do it. I need
I
it for
got
the
to
next
work.
book.
Yeah, exactly. Who could say that in their profession?
Right? That's fantastic. That's great that you get to be able to do those things. There's certain creative things, and to be able to do that on top of the other things that it sounds like you do as well. It's fantastic because there's a lot of people out there that have things that are relatable. Obviously, that's I think one of the first things that people flock to is whatever thing that they're into, movies, books, TV, and any of the other things out there, art, is if it's somehow relatable, that's the first thing, and then
Yeah,
interesting, and go down the list of things that make it so you're interested in it. But when it comes to having the time to be able to do it. So it's good that you have time to be able to put that out there. And I'm glad that people are recognizing, you know, originality. Again, I'm going back to I
Yeah,
can appreciate stories being retold that I enjoyed, but at the same time, I don't think all the stories out there have been told. So
right.
it's good for people to recognize and pay attention to and give credit to those original stories that are still coming.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Is there any other person out there, any other character, anything that gave inspiration to Rick Price, or is this more or less derived from you and maybe experiences that you could picture yourself having had?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, a lot of it was, the time period, that I was born into, being in New York at that particular time. And then just sort of, again, a lot of my life in general, but a lot of, people around me that I saw as well, that I kind of encapsulated into different characters in the book, and then gave them a little bit of dramatic liberty to make them just a bit more tad interesting, and a little bit more original. Um, but overall, because my life has been filled with so many different experiences and stuff. The characters got a lot to do with, kind of my identity, as well. And fictionalized, of course, because it's not a memoir, it's an autobiography
Right.
at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think you can create stories. I mean, some people live life experiences that are probably just incredibly interesting as they are, but at the same time, for the storyteller, it might be more interesting for you to tell a story that you get to have liberties as opposed to just drumming up life experiences.
exactly, exactly, agreed.
Uh, all right, on a similar but separate note, going back to the punk bands out there, are there any punk bands or specific band members that you could picture having been a double agent?
Ooh, that's a great question. I it's interesting because, again, I mean, it's a big cliche, but you know like Henry Rollins is, this is a guy, right? You kind of know him as one way, right? You kind of
Right?
like, he's spinning Black Flag, he's that angry, he's the quintessential angry front man. Then he goes on to do spoken word, 3 hours of spoken word, that is completely captivating. He's then a novelist, and he's writing, books and poems and, memoirs, and you kind of go like, wow, and then he's been in movies,
Right?
and
Right?
then you kind of go like, this guy, he's got a lot of different lives here, man, and
Right?
he's expressing himself, and he's being a true, authentic self, throughout everything that he's doing, but yet he's carrying everything with him. You can't take away, how he grew up in DC, or, being, the front man of Black Flag, and, into where he is today. I mean, it all makes sense. You just have to understand the backstory again. So, that's always been an inspiration to me, because, my character is very similar to that, right? You grow up along the way, but you never lose those roots, but you just kind of reinterpret them into something else. So I think
Right?
that, that's probably the, top of my head, the best answer I could think of for that question.
That was fantastic. And to be honest, as I was asking and then you were giving the answer, I'm thinking, you know what? A double agent would be great as a
Right?
movie person, a TV person, somebody in a band, because they could kind of channel some of that they're keeping within outward. And people are just like, that's the music, that's the movie, that's the TV show, that's the book, that's the whatever.
Right. Like, can you imagine Henry Rollins, like, stuck in China with a dead prostitute, having to hide his cover as a CIA agent, full of anger, and a lifetime of trauma, and, violence, and then he's got to, like, make decisions to save his own life overseas.
Right.
Like, what would that look like? It would be
Right.
insane.
That would be insane. And you could totally picture it. I wish Henry Rollins was a little bit younger because it would be great to have him in there. No offense to him. I think he might be just a little bit above
He
where
is. He
Rick
is, but
Price is.
he'll make a great cameo, though. Don't worry.
Right.
We'll
Yes,
get him
that
in
would
there
be
somehow.
fantastic. Yeah, I could totally see him. I think he doesn't seem like he's going to do any performance like musical performance other than spoken word. I don't know that that's really his thing at this point.
I just read that he got into the studio with Ian MacKaye, from Minor
Oh,
Threat, to do like
never mind.
a four song, EP or something like that. So who knows? I mean, I can't wait to hear that. That's going to be insane.
Yeah, never mind. Then
Yeah,
he's going to go that route. I was going to
we'll
say
see.
it'd be great to get him in. I could see making cameos in
Yeah,
things that make sense for him at this point, and this
yeah,
makes sense for him.
totally. Be fun.
Is there anything else we should know about what you are up to? Anything else that we maybe didn't cover? Obviously, not trying to give any spoilers about Thank God for the Sinners, but anything else?
No, I encourage everybody to go to my website, ericmagan.com. You can follow all Rick Price's madness there. You can read all the reviews. You can see my Toast with the Gods links on YouTube. You can order the book from there. I don't know. It's just, I've been pretty engaged on social media lately, so I'm trying to, get the word out there. Again, it's a book that really needs to get a presence, really needs to get the right people behind it. Again, it's an original story. It's got, incredible elements of just, psychological thriller involved, into this amazingly complex anti-hero. And it's going to take a bit to get out there, and I just want to encourage everybody to, take a try, give it a read. I think you'll enjoy it if you enjoy this kind of music and you enjoy originality. I think you'll really enjoy it. And just carry on, because again, the time to make original product and original movies and original screenplays and original stories is now.
Right.
I see too much cliche all the time, going on, and I just love when something new pops out there. And I know it's the most difficult thing when things are new. So again, I just want to encourage everybody out there to read. People don't read. So, it's like, you enter a field, like you're kind of like, oh man, I wrote a book, but Jesus, who the hell's reading?
Well, again, that's why I mentioned audiobooks. Some people
Yeah,
talk about all the books they read, but what they really mean is all the books they heard somebody read that somebody else wrote.
exactly. Well, listen, try take a little time out. It's a good read. It's a fast read. It's not a very long read. Chapters are, kind of small and frenetic, and it's got a pulse of its own. I think it's worth taking a dabble.
And what social medias are you active on? Where should people check you out and follow you?
At Instagram, Facebook, just started putting up some YouTube videos as well. So slowly but surely gonna, try to get that out there. I came from an agnostic position on that to like, oh shit, I got to do it.
Right. It's helpful. I'm with you. I don't particularly like spend a lot of time doing it, but at the same time, that's how you can reach. And I've met so many great people. So I
Yeah,
definitely wouldn't shit on that as a way to do things because I've met a lot of great people doing that. But
sure.
at the same time, it's like I kind of just want to see people like this conversation right here.
Yeah,
We could have tried to go back and forth on social media or something like that, but that wouldn't have been entertaining. This is entertaining. This is great.
just as fun. Yeah,
Right.
I had a great time, and I think shows like yours are really important. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you taking the time. I wish you the best of luck. I'm going to get through reading the rest because I just got the book a couple days ago, and I'm a
Okay.
bit of a slow reader myself.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, on top of that, is it available like Kindle digital? Because I know some people will like to have the hard copy
Yeah.
in their hand, but some people like to bring their tablet, their phone, or wherever as well.
Yeah, again, if you go on my website, ericmagan.com, or you go to Amazon, you'll find the Kindle version, the audio version, the paperback version, the hardcover version. It's all there. I try to make it as easy as possible for people to absorb it.
Perfect. And I think that's great because all of us do better on one way or another, and it's great when
Yeah.
there's a variety available. And for all those people that just can't quite get around to reading, let's hope there's a movie at some point.
Be fantastic.
All right, Eric, I really appreciate you taking the time. Best of luck. I look forward to a follow up as we get the last chapter, so we know something's got to be coming.
Great. And when you finish it, do ping me and let me know what you think. I'm really curious.
Absolutely. My co host of SLC Punkcast, I'll make sure it gets in his hands too, and hopefully he'll get a chance to read it so you can get two.
That'd be awesome.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You
Cheers.
too.